Hi everybody, I'm Scott, and today I'm going to talk about the Silmarillion, the first quarter of it, the first 75 pages or so. I'm reading this with a couple of people, Steve Donoghue and David Wiley, and I'll link to their channels below. And when they post videos, I'll put the actual video posts down there as well. And we're reading this over 4 weeks' time. And it is the first time that I've read it, but not the first time that the other two have read it, is my understanding. So wow. First of all, some things that I've learned since I last talked about this was, so the Silmarillion was published in 1977. The Hobbit was published first in 1930 something. It was like 36 or something. And then almost 20 years later, not quite 20 years later, The Lord of the Rings was published. And then the Silmarillion was published in 1977, but J.R.R. Tolkien passed away in 1973. So this was put together by Christopher Tolkien, his son, from his notes. And his notes, as I understand, were extensive. And what this book is, this book is not a novel or anything like that. Some people have called it the Elvish Bible. And I think that they call it that because, well, it starts with the creation myth of Earth, Middle Earth. So, as I'm reading this, it's like this is a book that the characters in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit would have maybe read. These are the stories from their past, that people told each other in Middle Earth. And there's a truth to the stories in that setting, right? So this is how the Earth was created, and this is, everything. Some interesting things that I learned while I was researching a little bit is that Tolkien's notes were so extensive, and he would write one of these stories, like a chapter in the Quenta Silmarillion, and then he may send it to somebody, but then after he sent it to someone, he would revise the one that he had, and then that person may send it back with some suggestions or questions, and then he would edit that one. So he ended up with just he was working on this since at least The Hobbit, right? So 40 years of fiddling with this, and never being able to pull it together into a publishable book. Whether or not that was his goal, I'm not actually certain. But after J.R.R. Tolkien passed away and Christopher Tolkien took over and pulled this stuff together, he had many versions of each story to choose from, and he was choosing like the most complete ones, but they weren't always the latest ones. So these are things that I'm learning there. So in that way, it's developed almost by a single person, but the way that myths are developed, myths pass through many hands, many revisions, through history. It's like the collective culture of the myth changes it through time, and there are little pieces of it that were there in ancient times, right, and little pieces of it that have become modern. And J.R.R. Tolkien, he created that all by himself. I can just imagine, Christopher Tolkien, how much material he had to go through. I understand that there's a 12-volume history of the Middle Earth in which Christopher Tolkien has taken a lot of the drafts and things like that, and he's putting them in there. It's not something that I could imagine wanting to read, but that just shows you the sheer volume of stuff that J.R.R. Tolkien had developed, right? And this stuff, of course it's not all mentioned in Lord of the Rings, but it's all there. When J.R.R. Tolkien was writing Lord of the Rings, this stuff was in his mind, the past, right? The power of Sauron and things like that come from the distant past. And so little things in that touch, little things in Lord of the Rings touch some of the myths in here, but the myths in here are things that the people in Middle Earth, the characters in Lord of the Rings, had probably heard these stories their whole lives, and this is how their world developed. So it's fascinating in that way. So the first book is called the Ainulindale, and it is the creation myth, and it's fascinating. So you start with there's one god. His name is Eru, E-R-U, and he's the one, right? But he's also called Iluvatar. So a lot of the things in here, especially the ancient ones, as we're moving forward in time, this happens less, it seems. But there's multiple names for things, which is confusing, of course. But the very first line is, there was Uru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and Arda is the world. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. So he made these Ainur, A-I-N-U-R, and he made many of them, and they with him create the world. So they're like angels, I guess, maybe, but they're not the same as angels. They're different. They're Ainur, right? This is he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. I think this is beautiful. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but a few together, while the rest hearkened. For each comprehended only that part of the mind of Iluvatar from which he came, and in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came into deeper understanding, and increased in unison and harmony. And it came to pass that Iluvatar called together all the Ainur and declared them a mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed. And the glory of its beginning and splendor and its end amazed the Ainur, so they bowed before Iluvatar and were silent. And then he said, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony a great music. And since I have kindled with you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. So he's saying, I'm giving you this great theme, and you are all joining in harmony with your own skills, right? With your own additions. And through that creates the world. There comes a point where there's three themes. After the third theme, Iluvatar shows the Ainur what they've created. So up till now they've heard it, and then he shows them the vision of what it is that they've created. It's really, really something. Just really cool. And then he says the children of Iluvatar are elves and men. So those are coming. Those are coming forward, right? Here's just a beautiful line. So the other Ainur looked upon the habitation set within the vast spaces of the world, which the elves called Arda, the earth. And their hearts rejoiced in light, and their eyes beholding many colors were filled with gladness. But because of the roaring of the sea, they felt a great unquiet. And they observed the winds in the air, and the matters of which Arda was made, of iron and stone and silver and gold and many substances. But of all these, water they most greatly praised. And it is said by the Eldar that in water there lives yet the echo of the music of the Ainur, more than in any substance else is in this earth. And many of the children of Iluvatar hearken still, unsated, to the voices of the sea, and yet know not, for what they listen. Love that. I mean, it's just awesome. That's beautiful. So it goes on, and there is one of the Einar. So the Einar are then split into two groups. The upper one is called the Valar, and the Valar are given a choice. They're sent into the world, and when they're sent into the world, they become part of the world. Their powers are no longer outside the world. Their powers become in the world. And of one of those is Malcor. And Malcor's story is very much like Satan's story. Let's see if I can find a little bit about him. You can probably predict a little bit of what we've got here. So here it is. It says, Malcor was the chief, even as he was in the beginning, the greatest of the Einar, who took place in the music. And he feigned, even to himself at first, that he desired to go thither and order all things for the good of the children of Iluvatar, which again are elves and men, controlling turmoils of the heat and the cold that had come to pass through him. But he desired rather to subdue to his will both elves and men, envying the gifts with which Iluvatar promised to endow them. And he wished himself to have subjects and servants, and to be called Lord, and to be a master over other wills. So you can see immediately that Malcor is individually branching off from the harmony and going his own way, and that continues. And again, you've got the good and the evil kind of forming there, or the good and the evil forces. So that was in the Ainulindale, and then after that is something called the Valaquenta, and it describes more of the same kind of territory. It talks more about Malcor and such, and then you get into the Quenta Silmarillion, which is the bulk of this book. It's most of it, and we read. I'll put the schedule in on the video, and reread the Ainulindale, Valaquenta, and then the Quenta Silmarillion chapters 1 through 7. That's what we've read for this week, and I'll put the whole schedule in below so that if you want to follow along, you're more than welcome. And then as you move through this Quenta Silmarillion, it's just describing more. It starts again, sort of with the beginning, the creation, and then just moves forward in time until we get the elves, and the elves are what are the main race, I guess, in the Quenta Silmarillion. Now, again, this is not like a novel at all. This is, I mean, people aren't really talking, you don't have a discussion between two people. There's sometimes somebody is giving a speech, I am feeling this way because of blah blah blah, or or whatever. It's again, it reads like a myth. It reads like the Elvish Bible, I guess, is not a bad way to put it. It's what the characters in Lord of the Rings would be reading. So about their past anyway. I'm sure reading lots of things, but it says here, the elves believe that men are often a grief to Manwë, who knows most of the mind of Iluvatar. For it seems to the elves that men resemble Malcor most of all the Einar, although he has ever feared and hated them, even those that served him. So it's already saying that elves see men as resembling Malcor, who is becoming the dark force in the world. So I thought that was interesting. Galadriel, as I read through this, there's tons of names. There's like, the elves have split into 3 parts. There's like these Noldor and like fair elves and all this stuff. Just lots happening. So it's talking a little bit about how these elves were split and everything, and then Galadriel is mentioned. So Galadriel, this is, I should mention too, there's ages in the history of Middle Earth. So there's actually 4 ages, right? This is about the first age. And then Lord of the Rings was set in the 3rd age. And when Sauron was defeated, that was the beginning of the 4th age. So this whole book, from what I've read about it, is about the first age. So it's saying here that Galadriel was around in the first age. But so it's talking about the Finwë was the king of the Noldor. The Noldor is a group of elves. I think they called them the Deep Elves. And the sons of Finwë were Fëanor, who becomes important in a minute, and then Fingolfin and Finarfin. And then it says a little bit later, the sons of Finarfin were, and then it lists them, like Finrod, Odoreth, Androd, Agnor. These 4 were close in friendship, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, a sister they had, Galadriel, most beautiful of all the house of Finwë. Her hair was lit with gold as though it had caught in a mesh in the radiance of Laurelin. So, I have no idea what Laurelin is, That happens a lot in here. It's like, I don't know what some of this is. So when you're reading it, you're like, well, I'm not sure. And you have no idea which of these names are going to be become important later in the reading. So that was interesting. And Sauron is also mentioned. I'll see if he's mentioned more. But of course, he's on Malcor's side. He's one of Malcor's things, right? So it kind of proceeds that way through, it's talking about Malcor, it's talking about the elves. And then in chapter 7, things kind of start to coalesce, which is cool that we ended on chapter 7, because chapter 7 was the most story-like chapter, I think, in the ones that we've read. And it's called Of the Silmarils and the Unrest of the Noldor. So just at the very beginning, what the Silmarils are, I'll describe right here. In that time were made those things that afterwards were most renowned for all the works of the elves. For Fëanor, being come to his full might, was filled with a new thought. Or it may be that some shadow of foreknowledge came to him of the doom that drew near, and he pondered how the light of the trees, the glory of the blessed realm, might be preserved imperishable. Then he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore, and his power, and his subtle skill, and at the end of all he made the Silmarils. So there's these 2 trees, and the trees give off light. And he's saying, how can we preserve this light forever? So he makes the Silmarils, and he captures them. There are 3 jewels in which he captures the light of these trees. And then just on this same page it says, Malcor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. From that time forth, inflamed by this desire, he sought ever more eagerly how he should destroy Fëanor and end the friendship of the Valar and the elves. So the Valar, again, were those angelic Ainur who were in the world. He wanted to end the friendship between them, right? So, but now Fëanor starts to have a greedy love for the Silmarils himself. So you can start to see shades of Lord of the Rings here, where you've got this object that is so beautiful that it starts to destroy reason, and that's becomes the object, that everybody wants, and that's what's happening here. So not only do you have Malcor, the evil one, wanting it, but you also have Fëanor, who created them, having a jealous desire to protect them at all costs. And that's something that Malcor can work with, you know what I mean? It's the same thing. It's something that Malcor understands and can start to pick apart. And it causes conflict between the elves. So that's kind of where we're ending here. So So yeah, I mean, the experience of reading this, it's been really interesting. I've seen some things that suggest that you ought to read the Silmarillion before you even read The Hobbit, and I think that's ludicrous. I can't imagine someone reading this first and then reading those things. But I think, you read The Hobbit and you read The Lord of the Rings, and that creates the desire to read this. And then I can see that maybe one would go back and read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which I would plan to do after this, because it's creating a lot of interest in me. I'm like, okay, I wonder how much of this is in Lord of the Rings. I actually don't know for sure. I've read it a couple of times, and I definitely want to read it again after reading this. But I don't think one would start here. This is not. I think it only has meaning in the context of you knowing the Lord of the Rings. It's like, it's not that you can't comprehend it. It's just that it doesn't have a lot of meaning without you understanding the world at all. So yeah, I mean, you read The Hobbit, you read The Lord of the Rings, then you read this, if you want. A lot of people don't read this, but then I am going to go back and read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to see if anything I learned from here is mentioned in there, because I'm sure that some of it is. So, well, that's it for this week. I'm going to continue. Next week I'll read Quentas VIII through 17. And thanks for watching.